do you plan on asking me my favorite episodes? Because I always am like, what's the one with the, and I always like, you know what I mean? I'm not good at being like, oh, it's called this. It's this episode.
Yeah,
I'm
I
really
had
not.
that down as like a safety question almost.
Okay,
Sort of
so we
like,
might not.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Um,
It's also a hard question because like so many are my favorite, and I'm always like, I don't know.
it's to me, it's like it's not a very interesting question, right? Because for me personally, it's like I don't have one favorite or one second
Yeah,
favorite. I like this
yeah,
one for this, and I like that one for that.
exactly.
So
Yeah, some
uh,
people do have like their favorite episode that they'll say, but I'm not. I same as you. I'm just not one of those people. I'm like I like all of it. Like I really
yeah,
do.
especially
There's
with
some
Star
highlights
Trek,
and some low ones, but
like especially with Star Trek because it's so many like different. Like every episode can be an entirely different genre, or movie can be an
yeah.
entirely different genre. It's like, well, okay, I like the horror movie episode of this and the action movie, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah, totally.
okay, so I'll just jump in and I'll do a quick intro. So, greetings, everyone. This is Brian here with another supplemental episode. This week, we're going to be interviewing Aliza Pearl, who you may know if you follow the world of Star Trek Adventures role-playing systems. She was on Shield of Tomorrow back at Geek and Sundry, and now is on Blood of the Void, right? Which is with Q Times on Twitch. Is that right?
Yep,
Okay.
that's right.
So thanks for joining us, Aliza. This is first kind of interview I've ever done, which interviewing in general is something I've wanted to try my hand at a while. So thanks for being my guinea pig.
Oh, that's cool. I'm excited.
So yes, as I mentioned when I first reached out about doing this, I think we had met briefly before at a Mae Jemison charity event, like 5 years ago now. I think at the California.
Oh, I think it was 2016 or 17.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's like Mae Jemison, who is the first woman of color in space, and also one of my favorite pieces of Star Trek trivia, the only person to be on Star Trek and also actually fly in space in real life. She is the
That's
only
right.
person to do that.
Yep.
She former astronaut, space shuttle astronaut. She started a charity foundation that I volunteered at, and I guess you were a volunteer there as well. But in prepping for this interview, I also found another crazy connection between the two of us that I didn't realize until like yesterday, is that apparently you and I have worked together in the past.
We have.
We have, apparently. I was looking at your IMDb, and you were on a web series back in like 2010 called Further Adventures of Cupid and Arrow. Yeah.
Oh my God. What did you do on that show?
I was a production assistant, and I really feel like you can see my work on screen.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I'm sure.
yeah, I was just doing some basic research. I looked at your IMDb and I saw that title, and I have not literally thought of those words in that order in years. I was like, that sounds vaguely familiar. Why do I know that title? And then put the pieces together. So
that is a full 10 years ago
10
that
years,
we did
yeah.
that. I have this weird dubious distinction of having done a million web series in my time in LA. Like for reals. I think I have been on 12 web series, like
Especially
as a regular character on webs. It's like I have a whole acting career that's only on the internet.
especially from that era, right? Like the 2010 era is when
Mhm.
the idea of a web series was everything was a web series for
Yeah.
like 6 months.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I have no idea if we actually met or were on the same sets at the same time. I have no idea. I just saw that on your IMDb and I was like, that's incredible.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah, the only thing I remember from that shoot are three of the locations, which was one was a rooftop somewhere downtown. I remember because that location was beautiful. A bar that had a lot of people in it, which feels really weird now these days. And then somebody's apartment that I only remember because they had like graphic novels of Twilight Zone episodes on their bookshelf. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Maybe it existed.
I remember all three of those locations, and I don't think I was in any of those scenes.
Okay, so I guess we didn't actually meet, but we did work together. Anyway.
Yeah, how cool.
Yeah. Excuse me while I throw my cat out of the way. So anyway, obviously we are both huge Star Trek fans. I run a Star Trek role-playing game podcast, and you GM one as well, or you're just moving into GM one. which we'll jump into in a moment. But before, I figure we might as well just jump in with like basic Star Trek. Like, where did you come into being a Star Trek fan? At what point in your life? And how did you get into it, and where did it kind of originate from for you?
Cool. Okay. So my Trekkie origin story is that I watched both TNG and TOS as a kid. And the TOS was obviously reruns. TNG was I watched a lot of it on the air, but not much. I don't remember watching it like every week religiously as a kid, but I did watch a good amount of it while it was on. And also I watched it with my dad at home in New Jersey. And then me and my brother would get sent down to Miami, Florida every summer to like stay with our aunts and uncles and grandparents. And one of our aunts and uncles they lived like a very like devout life as like yogis and raw vegans.
Oh wow.
And they are like OG vegans. They have been vegan since the 70s. And so when we were going down to like stay with them in the 90s, like we were, like we were eating soy dogs and tofu dogs before most people knew what those were. Yeah, before they were like in every grocery store.
Wow.
But anyway, we'd spend pretty much every summer with them and like stay at their house and another aunt's house. And when we stayed at their house, they wouldn't allow us to watch any TV except for Star Trek: The Next Generation. That was the only TV show we were allowed to watch. And so I have fond memories of like watching TNG at their house and watching it with my dad. And then watching TOS, like the late night reruns. And then I never knew that there were conventions. I didn't really know about the Trekkie community and the community of fans. And I just kind of like drifted away from actively watching it. But I always have loved space and sci-fi and the stars and the cosmos and things like that. But it never, I just kind of like, it was kind of in the background of my consciousness for a while. And then I moved to LA, started working towards building an acting career. And for a while, I was just like, it felt like my entire like creative mind and sometimes like presence and personality was geared towards like becoming a working actor. And it was not healthy. And it was not fun. That part of it was not fun. And I realized like, oh, if I keep going this direction, I'm going to burn out and not want to be an actor anymore. And I'm going to start hating this. So I was like, what can I do to like creatively stimulate myself and actually like do things that I like? And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should just like look at the things that I am interested in and inspired by. And so I started getting back into space and sci-fi. And I decided at that point to do two things. One, start taking improv classes. And two, start watching all of Star Trek chronologically. And this was like, I think this was like 2011-ish.
So after you and I worked together.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Like your actual move to LA, presence in LA was part of kind of what rekindled something that had been in childhood.
Yeah, and also the fact that we have NASA JPL, and we have a lot of like, Boeing and all these like really big space science companies and entities, Griffith Observatory. Southern California has a really amazing history when it comes to space science. And so, I was like, all of a sudden I was like down the street from Griffith Observatory and started going there all the time. And it rekindled my love of space. And then I was like, oh, I also love Star Trek and sci-fi. Let me like go revisit all of that. I had never watched Enterprise. I think I was just, I was either between like, I think I was in college or just out. I forget what years it was on, but I was like just around the college age when it was on. And I just wasn't watching much TV except like DVDs of Sex and the City. So I just kind of missed Enterprise when it was on the air. So I went back and watched that. And I just got super engrossed in Star Trek. And that was kind of like my second coming as a Trekkie.
Okay, and is that then what led into improv Star Trek and then Shield of Tomorrow and Geek and Sundry? Is that how do those two?
Pretty much. I mean, it wasn't a direct line, but yeah, like because I started taking improv classes around that same time that I started getting back into sci-fi and Star Trek. Yeah, they kind of did become like they kind of like became a creative, presence in my life at the same time. And so improv wise, I started at Upright Citizens Brigade in LA, and I loved it. And I made a lot of friends there, some of whom I'm still like good friends with. And then I kind of drifted over to another improv theater that was mostly like narrative improv and genre storytelling. And I saw them they're called Impro Studio. I saw them do a show that was improvised Twilight Zone, and I was blown away. I was like, this is amazing. They're improvising. Not only are they improvising a story from beginning to end with no script, no plan, they're also improvising sci-fi, which I was like, oh my God, I want to do this. So I started taking classes there. And then from classes, I started meeting friends. And then some friends that I met in those classes, we got together and started producing the Star Trek improv show.
Okay.
And then from there, we started doing it all kind of like daisy chains. Because
as so many
once
like
we started doing the
in
improv
Hollywood
show,
do, right? Like this random thing then goes, this other random thing gets built
led
on
to
top
that
of it.
thing.
Yeah. And so
And
that led to
once we
Geek
started
and
doing the
Sundry.
Star Trek improv show, my friends, I had two friends who knew I was doing the show. I think one of them had seen the show and the other hadn't, but they knew I was doing it. And they both referred me to jobs, one at Nerdist and one at Geek and Sundry. And it happened at the same time, basically, like within weeks of each other. I was now working at Nerdist and Geek and Sundry.
Lucky that they were in the same building.
Yeah,
really,
like literally right across the hall from each other.
Yeah.
They were, yeah.
So another interesting connection is that your Star Trek improv group actually performs at Yuri's Nights out here every year, which I help organize. I'm one of the organizers, volunteers for Yuri's Night. And yet, as huge of a Star Trek and improv fan as I am, I have never once been able to actually like take time out of the nights to watch you guys, because I'm always so busy running around with my head cut off about whatever the hell the thing is.
It's a busy night.
Every like
that's not surprising because it's like so busy.
Yeah, I first volunteered when I first moved out here in like 2008, and then fell out of it, and then came back. I'm thinking like 2016, and every year since 2016, except for this year or this last year, I've been like, okay, I'm gonna take 20 minutes to run over it and watch something, and it has yet to happen. But one of these days, when we start having the event in person again, I will actually make it happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think we only performed there like twice, or
the last
three
couple
times.
Years?
I don't remember which years, but we didn't. Obviously, this year we didn't do it. I don't remember if we did it 2019, but we did maybe 2 years. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember. But don't worry, because it might have been that we weren't performing some of the years that you thought you missed us. We probably weren't. We might not have been there.
That's possible. It's like 2016 is when I got back into it, and I know at least a couple of times I've been like, okay, I'm gonna gotta make sure I see that, and then completely failed to do it. But obviously not this past year, 2020, and we're gonna be doing it virtually again this coming year. So hopefully 2022, I guess, in the new world.
I will say, I thought the virtual one was really lovely. Like I thought it was well done, and though you guys did a great job making it an online event.
I mean, I didn't do a whole lot in that regard, but like Loretta and Christy, who I'm sure you have known and have talked to, did an amazing job and put something together with so like everybody else in the world, scrambling and trying to figure out how to completely change everything at the last minute, and putting on literally a global and extra global events with all of these incredible people like Bill Nye and Mark Kelly and so on and so on. So we actually did this this is literally just occurring to me off the cuff, but the thing that I did for Yuri's Night last year was a Twitch stream, video game stream with Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut, and Scott Manley, who are both YouTubers. So if we do something like that again, which I think we're going to, or at least we're going to try to, it would be awesome to have you as a part of it if you were
cool. Cool. Yeah, let me know.
Yeah, because that was definitely a last minute hey, this would be kind of a cool virtual thing to do as part of this, just as an idea, and then quickly toss something together. So
Mhm.
I think the idea is hopefully to do something like that again this time, but maybe a little bit more polished, a little nicer. Anyway, so again, just off the cuff. Um, so your the improv, the Star Trek improv, have you guys been able to perform in the COVID world at all? Have you been able to adapt, or have you just been on kind of a hiatus?
No, yeah, we so in March when things started shutting down here in the US, we were I think barely one or two episodes into our sixth season on stage, and then of course we had to stop. And then we took some time off. We took a few months off, and then midsummer we started to reconvene, and we put together an online version of our show.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's called The Improvised Generation on Screen. And we did, I think, 8 or 9 week run this fall on, it was on Twitch on a channel called Outpost 13, which does a lot of like theater and comedy and talk show type stuff. So, so yeah, we were able to turn it into an online show, and it was hard, but it was just nice to have a thing to devote time to during the pandemic and quarantine.
Yeah, even if it's not like the way you would ideally want to do it, or the way maybe
Hmm.
you thought you were going to do it, just to have something to do.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
it's been a rough 10 months now, I guess. I don't even
yeah,
know anymore.
yeah.
Um, and so the Star Trek Improv led into Geek and Sundry, like you mentioned. And so, how did you get involved
Mhm.
specifically with Shield of Tomorrow?
Yeah, so my friend Hector Navarro, who I met through improv, through I think UCB or some other indie comedy theater, he knew that I was doing the improvised generation, and he had been cast in Shield of Tomorrow already. And I guess Eric Campbell, our GM, was asking him and some other folks if they have recommendations of people who know Star Trek at least a little bit and also have some type of like comedy or improv background. And Hector was like, I know someone. And so he passed my name along to Eric. I went in for an interview, and they cast me in Shield of Tomorrow.
That's awesome. Yeah, we again, another weird connection. We have a mutual friend that used to work at Geek and Sundry, Eddie,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
who
Eddie Doty?
Eddie Doty, who I'm still mad at
Oh,
today for not coming, because he knows what a massive Star Trek fan I am, and it's like, still, you should have brought me in on that, and I'm still
oh,
tweaked at it, but that's okay.
oh no.
So I had to go and start on my own Star Trek role playing game story,
Well, there you
which
go.
which
Okay.
here we are. Um, and so you guys did that, but then eventually things changed there at Shield of Tomorrow, and so Shield of Tomorrow has sort of become, it's a different thing, but Clear Skies. And then from Clear Skies comes the game that you're playing right now, which is specifically a Klingon-based our Star Trek Adventures campaign, right? Called Blood of
Yep.
the Void. So tell
Mhm.
me how Blood of the Void came around.
Yeah, so Eric Campbell, who's now my very dear friend, but back before Shield of Tomorrow started, when he was starting to put things together, he and I had our meeting, and I think even in that first meeting with him, we both were like, "Wouldn't it be dope to do an all Klingon game? What if this?" And he was like, "We could do that." I was like, "Really? Wait, wait, wait." But then he was like, "No, we're gonna just go with the regular Starfleet because they have this core book coming out, and it'll just be simpler." And but we both kind of like bookmarked the idea in our heads, and we were like, maybe in the future we could do this.
So this was
And
totally
then
before, because Modifius just came out with the Klingon version of the rulebook. So this
this is way before that.
all the way before that. Okay.
This is when the original Star Trek Adventures book came out in 2017.
Okay.
We were or yeah, we were starting our show, like I think our show launched months of like a little bit before the like main Star Trek Adventures core book came out. And so this was back then.
Wow. Okay.
Like the Klingon core book was not in existence at all. But we were like, oh, it'd be so cool. It could be like Game of Thrones Klingons, like that kind of
Exactly.
campaign.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're speaking my heart. Yeah.
Yes. So we kind of set that idea aside. Shield of Tomorrow launched and went for a year. Then we did Callisto 6. And then we kind of like exited from Geek and Sundry and became the Streampunks, like kind of reformed the group. And now we're the Streampunks. Clear Skies launched. And then how did it? Yeah, wow, I can't remember how exactly we came back around to deciding to do a Klingon show. But funny enough, the strange thing is, once again, Eric and I talked about it. We decided to move forward with putting together this show. And then we heard from Modiphius that they were creating the Klingon core book. So it was
Wow.
again
Okay.
right before their core book came out. Just crazy timing.
So that's actually totally backwards from what I anticipated. I expected to be like, oh yeah, Modiphius said they were going to do this, and so we thought it'd be cool to build off of that. But it was just serendipity on both accounts. It sounds like.
Yeah, it's so it's so wild that once again that timing worked out that way, where we were like just several months before that book came out, we were already starting to like get our show was in development basically.
Yeah.
And then so, we were supposed to launch right around sometime in the spring, but then our date got pushed back a couple of times, first because of the pandemic, but then also because we decided to coordinate with Modiphius because their Klingon book was coming out in July. And so we were like, okay, we'll also start our show in July and kind of like have some, synergy there.
Yeah, nice. So, and I was trying to sort this out. I know that Eric was and is the GM of Shield of Tomorrow and now Clear Skies. He was the GM or is the GM of Blood of the Void, but now you are the GM, or going forward you are the GM. Explain that difference a little
I
bit.
killed Eric Campbell so that I could take over the GM seat. That is the correct Klingon sequence of events in traditional Klingon
tragedy. Yeah.
So Eric was GMing both Clear Skies and Blood of the Void for like 5-6 months. And this summer we just kind of were talking about the direction of Blood of the Void and audience, and we were like, where do we see this show going? We don't know how long we'll run it for, but we definitely were feeling like we needed to just angle more into like letting the show be an all person of color show. And Eric was the one who actually was like, well, what if I just, step aside as GM and have a person of color take over? And I was like, what? No. At first I was like, no, what are you talking about? And then I thought about it and I was like, well, yeah, I guess that actually would kind of address the things that we want to do with the show. And then I was like, well, I would be down to GM. Like, actually, I would love to GM this show. And so that's how, we just kind of made that decision based on wanting to just kind of be all in on letting it be a space that was by and for people of color.
Okay.
And especially because we are like a Black and Asian crew, I personally think it's really interesting to explore Klingon stories from those two perspectives, because so much of Klingon culture and lore is kind of like these weird little cultural grabs and appropriations from Asian cultures, and then also like stereotypes of Black cultures. So I think, us having a Black and Asian group, and now me being a woman of color, a Black woman in the GMC, I'm really excited for the stories that we're going to continue to tell.
And is this your first time GMing in general, or for Star Trek Adventures in particular? Like, I'm dying to hear your experience or your perspective in terms of transitioning from a player into a GM, and what that, because with Tempest is the first time really any of us have played a role-playing game in general. I played a little bit of D&D, but that's it. And this is absolutely my first time GMing in any sense of the term, and it's absolutely been a journey. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective, like coming from the Shield of Tomorrow as a player and your other RPG experience, and then transitioning into a GM. Like, what has that experience and transition been like?
Yeah, so I have been GMing for the past couple of years. Okay. I started GMing on Geek and Sundry, and I got invited to guest on a show that was run by a bunch of my lady friends at Geek and Sundry called, I think it was called Weave Society back then, but then it became known as TTRPG. But it was basically this group of like 6 or 7 women hosts who would just like, they would co-GM. So they would just have a rotating GM seat and they would do little shorter campaigns of things. And it was mostly, they were playing Weave, mostly the game Weave. It's a card TTRPG. But then they opened it up to other games, I think. So anyway, they invited me to guest host and to guest GM. And I was like, sure, yeah, I actually really am interested in this whole GMing thing. And I did it and I loved it. I like just fell in love with GMing. I had so much fun. And I ended up doing 3 episodes with them to finish out my story. Because as a brand new, spanking new GM, I was like, how do I wrap up my story? I have no idea. So they were like, you could have a couple of more, like, let's see, just do one more episode. And then that wasn't done. And I was like, okay, you get one more episode and then you need to wrap it up. So anyway, I did like a 3-episode arc on that, had such a good time. And then a few months later, Sax Carr, who was one of the main producers at Geek and Sundry, was like, hey, so there's this new tabletop RPG coming out that's a kaleidoscopic fantasy. It's very colorful and cool. And it's it's like a, you know, D&D fantasy setting, but it's not D&D. It's a kaleidoscopic. It's this just new world. He was like, do you want to host? Do you want to GM it? I was like, yeah, I do. And so I got to do a 6-episode show called Overlight Fractured Paradox. And that was also very fun. Loved it. Loved. And I just was like super into GMing at that point. And since then I've done other GMing. I've done some random games here and there. Like I sat in for my GM, Emily Jacobson, for when we did Rat Queens. I was a player on Rat Queens on Hyper RPG, and I got to like sit in and be a guest GM one episode. And so things like that. I got to like do that for like a little bit. And then this new company formed this year called Sword and Scroll. And they are the same people who run D&D in a castle. So so like usually they would be having like twice yearly trips to England to host this amazing D&D in a castle event. But this year, obviously that did not happen. So they decided to like shift and create an online hiring GMs for your games type of platform.
Oh, interesting. So like a GM for hire almost.
Yeah. And it basically, it's like, so me, Eric Campbell, and a bunch of other amazing GMs and friends of mine are all on it. And like we basically are like, okay, I'm doing this one shot or this campaign, 5-week campaign, 8-week campaign, and people can sign up to join our tables, and it's all virtual. So awesome. I've been doing that as well. And I also did a Buffy or a Buffy one shot, and I'm looking into doing a Buffy campaign this like early 2021, maybe an Overlight campaign. And I created how do I describe this? I created a Star Trek Adventures one shot called Liberated Borg Reconstruction. And it's, you know how like there's this whole question or conversation about fantasy racism and how some people want it at the table and think it's interesting, and some people are like, no thank you, we live through that in real life, we don't need it at our table. So I decided to create an allegory for racism, and specifically Reconstruction, like post-Civil War Reconstruction for Black people. I made an allegory with Borg. And so I created this one shot that I ran it on Sword and Scroll, went over really well. And I'm trying to figure out, like, do I keep offering it for random, just like anyone who wants to play, or do I actually bring it to companies who want to do some type of like racism, anti-racism training? Because that's kind of what it is. It's like, it's like diving into these
really fascinating
topics. I'm just trying to figure out what to do with it next. Because it's not just a game. It's actually like, it's kind of intense. Like people had an emotional, visceral reactions at the end of it.
But as long as everybody, and this is something else I've been trying to, I guess, not struggle or figure out the path for in terms of running a Star Trek game specifically, because that sort of like tackling that sort of subject matter, or at least like getting into the messy mud pit of, okay, we're going to go there, is part of Star Trek, right? And like, doesn't always get it right, but it takes a swing at the bat. And again, like my group, we have very little experience, and you know, we we don't really know yet in terms of what our comfort level is in terms of emotional and cultural and racial and social uh, comfort level, I guess, is. And so that's something I've been trying to, because I want to tell Star Trek stories and I want to try to, get into some of the meat of that stuff. And I'm still trying to figure out like exactly where the best balancing act is. So
Mm-hmm.
is that something that you've I don't want to say struggled with, but have you found like in different contexts that you have a different that it's a different situation in different contexts?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Like so with the Liberated board game, that's a game that I have lots of like content warnings. I'm like, when
Yeah.
if you sign up for this game, this is what you're in store for. It's not going to be just easy and fun. It was fun, in a lot of ways, but it's like it's a social game. There's social combat, there's social conflict, and it's not easy. People are going to be mean to you. Like my NPCs are going to be mean to you. Like they're going to be racist towards you because you're a Borg, you're an ex-Borg. But I just decided to like lean into that and let people decide if they want to join the table and then see how it goes. But then of course, yeah, like with other games, I am of the group of people who is like, I actually don't want the fantasy racism in my game because number one, I experience it in everyday life and it's really annoying and I don't want to play a game and have it there
Yeah.
unless I agree to it, you know, which I don't normally for a normal game. And number two, I think not everyone is equipped to really deal with that in a way that's respectful or isn't gonna hurt some feelings.
Yeah, like get
So
into some like much like an improv or an acting class, right? Like sometimes those go into territory that you don't necessarily I took acting classes and improv classes out here myself, and
mhm,
you can sometimes unexpectedly find them going into territory that you didn't necessarily think they were going to go into and you're not necessarily
mhm.
prepared for.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure you probably have very similar experiences and with
Hmm.
an entirely different context because obviously I'm a white male, so I don't have that aspect to it. But yeah, in regards to like race and gender, and specifically race and gender in kind of the gaming space, I wanted to ask you as I just wanted to put this kind of question or prompt out there in terms of like, what should we be talking about as a community, or what should I be asking you that doesn't occur to me to ask in the first place because I'm a white male? It's just like, what is the blind spot that I have that you see that I'm not seeing that doesn't even occur to me?
Well, I don't think I know you well enough to say that, but I'll speak
Obviously, not me
generally.
specifically, but yeah,
Okay,
in
okay.
general, yeah,
Yeah,
the
in
royal
general,
me, I guess.
okay. God. Um, yeah, in general, well, first of all, I just would say, I think it's great that we started this conversation just talking about Star Trek
Yeah,
and like our own personal connections to it rather than just jumping into like, so tell me everything about race and Star Trek. Because one thing that has been happening, but I think people are starting to realize this, is that um, there there's a thing that happens where the professional Trekkies or professional nerds or geeks out there who are people of color only get invited to do like the diversity panel at a Comic-Con or at an online convention or things like that or a podcast. And I know I have a native friend who's like into comedy and writing and Garfield a lot, Joey Clift, who says, he actually called out a podcaster who invited him to come and talk. I think it was like a Thanksgiving episode. And so they were like, come and talk about this racist video game that like is racist towards Indians and natives. And he was like, why did you bring me on for this? What are y'all thinking? Like, you've never invited me onto your podcast before, and this is what you want me to come talk about.
yeah.
So like, so yay, that's not what we did here. But I thought it was awesome for him to call that out because and also I got to call out, I think it was I try to be very like political and not call out certain Star Trek things publicly because I would love
Oh
to
yeah,
work on Star Trek someday.
yeah, yeah.
But I do have to call out I think I forget what they called it, but they had some type of online convention this summer where literally the only like black actors who I think were on panels were on the diversity one. And that was disappointing to me.
Yeah.
And it also, that panel itself was kind of like, you know, I think it was like 4 actors, Black actors who are on the like the modern day shows. And it was I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to hear about, like, tell me what your favorite series who's your, I wanted to hear them talk about Star Trek, even if they're brand new to Star Trek, or maybe like they're into some other sci-fi or storytelling or TV show. Talk about Scan, I don't care, whatever. I just wanted to know who they were as people. But the
Yeah.
whole panel was them just talking about racism. And it was like, I think that is a blind spot when you're programming Black people and people of color to only talk about racism and discrimination, as if that our whole lives are encompassed by that. And like, yes, we do live lives where that happens to us a lot, but that's not who we are. Like, that's not our expertise, is not in being discriminated against, or it shouldn't be. It is by default, but like, come bring us on to talk about our actual like interests and our expertise in our careers and things like that. I'm gonna pause because can you hear that siren?
Oh, a little bit, but I've also got
Okay.
my own little siren here.
Oh yeah.
Begging for attention. Yeah.
I wonder if we're in the same neighborhood.
Where do you live? We'll cut this part out so people
Okay.
won't know where you live. But I'm on like Lancashire and Kling in North Hollywood.
Oh yeah, I'm in Los Feliz. So
okay,
different.
there we go.
Yeah.
Never mind.
But yeah,
your neighborhood's probably a lot nicer than mine, but mine probably has more parking than yours does.
no.
So.
Yeah. I don't even have a car anymore, which is the best.
Nice.
Don't ever have to worry about parking.
My we have tandem spots, right? And I have roommates, so every now and then, like this whole quarantine, I've barely gone anywhere for any reason, but you know, to errands or whatever, and I'll like park on the street until he goes somewhere, and then I park in front of him. And so in October, I think I was parked on the street, and somebody stole my catalytic converter out from under my car.
Whoa.
Which apparently is a thing. I never heard of that happening before. And every time I've told this story to either my roommate or friends, they're like, oh yeah, that happened to my so-and-so. So apparently it's a thing. Yeah. So I have not had a functioning car in 2 or 3 months now.
Oh man.
I've not missed it at all. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time to not have a car.
Yeah.
Not having a car has been great for me, to be honest.
Like in the past, I've known people who live here who didn't have cars and have wondered how the hell they manage it, how you survive in LA without having a car. And I don't know in non-pandemic times how one does it, but
yeah, I've done it before. Yeah, I did it for.
It's okay.
Pandemic's super easy, but like I did it several years ago. I had a Mercedes diesel 1983 car.
Wow. Whoa.
And it just had like 2 or 3 different expensive repairs, and I was like, I can't afford to fix this car right now, so I just let it sit for like 4 months. I was like, I'll fix it when I have the money to, and I just took the bus everywhere and the train. And I also lived I was in the Valley at that time, living in Van Nuys and coming down to like work in Hollywood and do classes in Los Feliz, so I was like on the bus all the time.
Oh, God.
But it worked. I mean, it worked though. I actually enjoyed it.
But how much of your day was that? Like, I will
not
confess
as much as you would think. Yeah,
I've used the Metro a lot, and I feel like the Metro is more useful than people give LA Metro credit for. But I've never really done the bus system. I've always imagined that like a 20-minute car ride takes 3 hours, but is it not really that bad?
If you need to get from like my area to Santa Monica, all bets are off. It takes forever. And I have done that. I've taken the bus from around here to Santa Monica for like doctor's appointments. And I do have to block off a good, like an hour and a half of travel each way. So that does suck, but I don't work there normally. And that's like every once in a while. So it's not, it's not like every day I'm doing that. But otherwise, like for like going around the neighborhood to just I even like would go to auditions on the bus sometimes. Like
God,
it was, I don't know, it's doable. Yeah, you just have to plan ahead. You have
I think
to
you're
like
a stronger person than I am, or at least a better planner than I am. Because I'm always like, oh shit, I should have left 5 minutes ago.
Right. I'm from the East Coast. I grew up taking buses and trains. Literally, I would take the train to high school every day, every morning. So I'm primed for public transportation. I actually didn't realize how much I missed it out here until I had to take it.
Yeah, because you're from Jersey, and I'm
Yeah.
actually from Jersey as well, but we're from
Oh,
entirely
yay.
different parts. So you're
What
from the
part
Newark
of,
area.
I bet you
I'm
I can guess based on our conversation. Wait, where?
oh let me no, let me hear
All
hear
right.
your guess.
I want to say you're from like South. Are you from South Jersey, but near the central part? Ah,
Uh, Not well. I mean, the whole like central, where does Central
central,
Jersey
yeah,
begin
quote
thing.
unquote.
But I'm from Atlantic County, so outside of Atlantic
Ah, I knew
City,
it. I knew
but
it.
South
South
Jersey for
Jersey.
sure. Yeah, I was gonna give you a hint to say that even though I don't, my mother pronounces it water instead of water, which I probably would have given it away. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, but you're from the Newark area, so much more
Uh-huh.
urban than the cow
Yes.
fields that I grew up around.
Yeah. Yep,
Ugh.
yep.
Um, so okay, we went off on a tangent there, but I wanted to
Okay,
circle back
huge
to something.
tangent.
Um,
What were we talking about with when the sirens happened? We were talking about
oh, I remember. It was race and gender and
oh,
sociopolitical.
oh yeah, panels,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
panels.
Yeah. So I actually, yeah. There's because as a quote, as a white male trying to do better and in that regard, one thing that I guess has occurred to me has been that distinction of, and I do think it has a kind of relation to Star Trek in the sense that like looking at a person and seeing the person first, but then also not discounting the whatever unique aspects of that person's life, right? For me, essentially, in other words, for me to look at you as Aliza Pearl and immediately like the first instinctive thoughts formed or whatever is Aliza Pearl the person as opposed to Aliza Pearl the woman of color who fits into these box and this box and that box, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
um how to give both of those their due, right? Or how to respect one without dismissing the other. Does that make sense as a framing? Um,
Yeah.
like, yeah, so, obviously to have this interview with you and talk to you about Star Trek in general, but talk to you as a Star Trek fan, as a role playing game player, uh, but not center this one aspect of your identity to everything. But then still, obviously, it is still a very relevant part of your identity. So not to
Mm-hmm.
dismiss it or ignore it or discount it. Like, I guess what's the best way to, as a person who is a non-person of color, what's the best way to balance those two desires or approaches in your respect or in your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind, it seems like you have a good grasp of that idea of like the individual versus like the collective or even the system, uh, because racism is, it happens in individual interactions, but we're also part of like a white supremacist racist system.
Yeah.
And so the individual responsibility for that is limited to, our actions, our beliefs, the way we treat people, the way we decide, things like the way we decide to spend our money and who we support. And it can like touch our lives in almost every part of our lives, but we only have so much control over on a day-to-day basis changing that and fighting against it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, if you are approaching people of color as people first, I think that's always going to be the right play. But realizing that whiteness is not universal, and so my blackness is not otherness automatically. My blackness is just as universal a human experience as your whiteness is, or as it is
Right.
for humans to have a beating heart or to breathe air. Like, I think that's the difference. Because if you still are considering like people of color are the other, or like immigrants are the other, then you're kind of like still centering whiteness. And when you center whiteness, that's how white supremacy thrives and breathes, just literally by centering whiteness in every
But like
single aspect of
this
life.
is the defaults.
Yeah.
And uh yes, something I've definitely I hope I think I've become more sensitive to is that idea of like the white male as the default of what a human is,
Right.
and as as opposed to just
Yeah.
a person is the default person, and that's it, right? As opposed to, you know, the stereotypical, you know, action star as like, okay, the white male European descendants is the default human, and then everything else is kind of a variation on that.
Right.
It's actually interesting. So that Mae Jemison event, um, it was a really interesting moment for me again as a white male. That is, there was one moment in the kind of the check-in area at the front of the science center, because you might remember that most of the volunteers were part of like a woman of color engineering sorority. Like that was the bulk of the volunteers for that evening. And so there was at one point where I was the only white male in a group of about 20 or 30 people. And I'm pretty sure it was the only time, or the first time and only time in my life, where I have been the minority on both of those axes, right? In a room with that many people. And it was very much like, oh, that's okay. This is what everybody else has to deal with all the time. And like, it was not like anybody was acting different or anything. Okay, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth here, but like, it wasn't like I was experiencing any of the negative things that a woman of color actually has to experience from assholes every single day. But just that sense of like, there is a default in this room, and I am not it. If that makes sense as a feeling.
Yeah.
And it's something I've tried to work out since, in terms of like how to put the person first without also dismissing, like, the the old Colbert joke from the Colbert Report, where he's like, oh, I don't see color, right? And it's from the Colbert Report, when he was playing his like Bill O'Reilly parody character. It's like, because that's like that's a dismissal of this aspect, operating under the guise of, oh, I'm above all of that, but so I'm ignoring it. But ignoring it isn't really the optimal solution either. So how do you like balance those two aspects? I don't know. I think I'm rambling at this point.
No, I get you though. Yeah. And another thought that comes up is, I think what I would like for white folks to realize right now too is that as you all are working through this and trying to like see these things better and become aware of them, Black people, some folks and people of color, some of us will be there to help you, and some of us are not available to do that because we're working through our stuff too. And I think there's this assumption that we should be helping white people do this, and we should be forgiving, and we should, and it's always comes down to us doing the emotional labor and bearing that burden. And I personally, I know me and a lot of people of color are actually like refusing to do that anymore. And just because like we have our own burden to bear, and we just, just like white people have grown up in this white supremacist racist system, so have we. And there are a lot of things that I've had to unlearn in my own psyche, and a lot of like, when I was younger, just like self-hatred about my hair and things like that, and wishing my nose was straighter, things like that. I've been unlearning these things for as long as I was learning them. Like for my whole life, I've been learning and unlearning anti-Blackness and white supremacy in my own body. And now I'm still doing that work. And yet I have like white friends who are new to it and like need guidance or think they need guidance from me. And I'm like, I can't also do it for you. You have to take this on yourself.
Right.
We're not trying to be dismissive of you guys. We're not trying to, we're not like trying to admonish you for asking for help. It's never a bad thing to ask for help, but you have to realize that if we say no, we are autonomous people, and our job is not to like be your spiritual guides and your anti-racism gurus. Like,
yeah.
So that's the other thing I would say, generally, like right now, just, we need grace too. We need space. We sometimes need, we need to be held and told like, it's going to be okay. And we can't always be doing that for everyone else all the time.
It's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to get it wrong. right? As long as you're trying to
Yeah.
do better tomorrow, or as long as you're trying to do better today than you did yesterday. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's another big thing too. It's like I'd rather you like just be a person and live, and let's have our friendship and our connection. And sometimes if you fuck up, you fuck up. And it's always better if you catch yourself do it and I don't have to do that.
yeah.
But, sometimes that's not how it works out. And I'm never going to fault people for making those mistakes. But then, in the same breath, like I actually have had a friendship recently where this person was trying to be better and trying to learn, but she kept kind of doing the same thing over and over. Um, and it was coming from, I know it was hard for her to see this, but it was coming from her own white supremacy and her own need to center whiteness and comfort for herself and for her white friends.
Hmm.
And what it was doing was deprioritizing my feelings as her friend and making it less important. If her white friend hurt my feelings and said something racist, she would run to the white friend and say, "Oh, you made a mistake. It's okay, blah, blah," instead of coming and comforting me.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, you know what? I know you're learning and I know you see this now, but I need to kind of step back from this friendship because I'm hurt. Literally, like
Yeah.
I'm just hurt. I can't be as close to you as I used to be because you keep hurting me. As you're learning, I am getting hurt. And I can't just be this emotional punching bag for you to learn how to decenter whiteness because you keep doing it over and over.
So how do you approach then that as a friendship in term, right? Because you have to, you have done that out of your own emotional necessity, out of your own sense of what you need to do for yourself. Um, do you do you then go back to her and say like, hey, I love the journey you're on, I'm proud of you for doing this, but i need to I need to be a little further back from it personally. When you get a little further down the road, like we can try to reconnect, or how do you approach that
Mhm.
as a friend, with somebody going through that kind of transition themselves?
Yeah, I think like just like with any other, because like here's the thing, friendship breakups can be just as bad as like romantic relationship breakups. And I've had
Yeah.
both in my life. And honestly, the friendship ones have been harder, like
Yeah.
seriously, or as hard as the romantic ones. And so I think just like with any other breakup where when you really care about the person, but you have to exit the relationship because you're getting hurt, I think it's on the other person to just give you that space. So, and give each other space. Cause like right now, I think we're both giving each other space. And yeah, I think in the future, yeah, we probably will reconnect and just kind of reconvene. But I'm not waiting around for that to happen because I know her learning and growth needs to happen at her pace. And when I was super invested in her learning and growth, I got disappointed. And I was like, oh, that's on me because guess what? She's human. She's not perfect. I'm expecting her to grow at a certain rate. That's just not, it's not her. That's me. That's an expectation I'm putting on her based on what? Based on nothing. I'm pulling that out of thin air. When I look at the person she is, like, I need to just accept this is who she is and where she's at right now. So I think it's about acceptance. It's about accepting people as they are, but also holding your, holding your boundaries of like in what ways am I going to let myself be hurt by a person or be affected by a person before I tap out and
Yeah.
step away. And that was a hard lesson I learned this year, but it's something I think I needed to do. I've needed to do in other relationships and friendships, and I didn't. And I finally did it this year with someone who I
And
was
that's a
really close
lesson that,
to.
like, you've had to learn for your own self, in terms of your
Yeah.
own, this is the kind of person that I need to be for my own sake and for my own well-being.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why don't we bring this back to Star Trek, if we can?
Uh-huh.
And so we talked about, or you had mentioned about bringing that sort of thing into telling Klingon stories, and how Klingons are kind of an amalgamation of various Earth cultures put together. So how is that
Hmm.
sort of thing influencing or playing into the campaign, the story that you're telling as part of Blood of the Void?
Yeah. So right now, I have only GM'd one session of Blood of the Void.
Okay.
And it's on VODs on Q Times YouTube channel if people want to check that out. That was episode 6, I believe. And so now going into the new year, my plan. So basically, that episode I already did was kind of like taking, you know, where Eric left us off and kind of like getting us into the next chapter of this game and of this campaign. Yeah, I think I have some, I don't want to spoil,
Of course, yeah.
some of
Well,
the story ideas I have, but I do, yeah, I do have a plan to dive more into the characters, each individual character and their own personal journeys. We're not going to hit, we're not going to like hit it on the nose about like the Black and Asian appropriation in Klingon cultures per se. I think that actually might happen organically, as we, as players, as, GM and players explore these stories. I think it's going to just come up. So I don't have any specific plans to that end, but I do plan to like dive into more of like the characters, what their goals and dreams are, how their specific type of Klingon is the universal Klingon. Again, going back to that idea of like default whiteness. And because, for Klingons, we have a we have an idea of default Klingonness. And I want to like kind of break that up and kind of dive into like how each of my players and the Klingons they play are quintessentially Klingon.
Oh, interesting. So like the Klingon warrior, quote unquote, but then as we've seen like bits and pieces throughout Star Trek, like you have the Klingon lawyer and you have that old woman Klingon from that one episode of TNG, right? That are like definitely not that's the Kang or
Kor, Kang, like all those.
Kang, Kor, Koloth. Yeah, those three. Yeah. Like those three who we feel are like the default Klingon. Right. So like exploring those different shades of cultural character, I guess.
Yeah, and the fact that there's, the Klingon core book is really beautiful because in the character creation process, they also show you like, hey, there's these are the castes in Klingon society. I personally knew about warrior and agricultural caste, but I didn't know about the other castes that are in Klingon society. So there's like a scientific caste of Klingon. So there's entire houses and families that are devoted to just scientific, progress and things, or I guess not houses, but there's like castes and families and stuff that are just like all scientists. I thought that was cool, like those are the kind of Klingons I want to learn more about. And we have one of our Klingons, Philip Jean-Marie, is playing a Klingon who comes from, he is a scientist, like he's the scientist on the ship, and he also is a hunter. Like, and I was like, that's interesting. This scientific mind, his Klingonness is expressed not just through the science, but also through hunting. And I just want to like dive more into that, like who he comes from and how hunting and science are intertwined for him and his family.
So that actually leads into a question that I was really interested in asking you specifically about this Klingon game, in the sense that as a RPG player, I'm sure you've heard the term murder hobo, right? Where you have a D&D group that they don't really engage with whatever the story is. They just go around and murder every NPC they see and loot the body and then move on, right? And it's funny because that was actually, like, again, our group not having really a ton of experience. I was very curious to see when we started, because that, at least as an approach, is so incompatible with Star Trek storytelling and premises in general. Like, to have a murder hobo Starfleet crew doesn't really like work. But I was wondering, like, if that is more of an issue, or how you approach that aspect with a Klingon game, right? Because a murder hobo feeling or disposition fits with a Klingon nature or a cultural character a lot more. So, like, have you or Eric found that to be an issue in like the Klingon games you find, or are you still able to like mine into actual narrative elements that really like move a story forward, I guess?
Okay, I'm laughing so much as you describe this, because in that first session I did, it was a little murder hobo-y.
Yeah.
I also set them up for that in a way, because I set them up to have basically a hunting. They got to hunt down these aliens that were hunting them on an abandoned ship. And so, yeah, it was a little murder hobo-y. But what's so funny to me is that at the end of the session, I I realized towards the end, I was like, oh, they're about to kill these two aliens, and there's a whole story behind why they're here, how they got here. Because it was a species that's from the Delta Quadrant, and they should, like, you wouldn't expect them to be in the Beta Quadrant. So I was like, I don't know if they're going to get this full story because they're about to kill the two aliens that are the only people who know their story. Sure enough, and I kind of listen, as the GM, I definitely was like, you could just kill them. They have just a few points left in your Klingons. So I kind of like goaded them into it. But I also was like, yeah, as the GM, I was like, oh man, this is tough because as a player, I would have like, I think I would have known to be like, let's get their story before we kill them. But I was the GM. So I was like, I don't want to like force them to do what I would do as a player. I'm just here to facilitate the story, and I'm just going to nudge them in ways that might be hopefully helpful to them, or at least interesting for them, or satisfying as players. And so sure enough, at the end of the game, after the session, I was like, did you guys feel like satisfied with all the data you got about the like why they were there and the story? And they were like, sort of. But I was like, okay, yeah, I need to figure out that balance as a GM, because yeah, of all the types of murder hobos, I think Klingons could be actually the most fun to be murder hobo, right? Because it's like part of their culture and their demeanor and stuff. But then also like
part of the franchise, because in the original series, honestly, as antagonists, right, they're just murder hobos at the start.
Yeah.
And then all of that cultural, nuance and subtlety gets layered in with more writers and more episodes, further down the line. So yeah, it's almost like, Klingons as RPG players evolved from their first game playing as a murder hobo, and then continuing to play and getting better at like playing the story part of an RPG, in the next campaign set in TNG or whatever.
But that said, they did uncover they uncovered like most of the story by doing a little bit of science and investigation on that ship. And so it was still like a Star Trek game, but it was definitely a Klingon game. And I actually liked that about that session, but I just want to make sure as the GM, it's just such a fine line between, I don't want to ever like punish my players for having fun and for doing the Klingon thing or the murder hobo thing. But then I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have given them all that story background because they killed the people who could have told them that. Maybe I should have kept some of that back. But I don't know. I guess I'll figure that out as I go.
And well, that's actually, so this is another question I was really dying to ask you in terms of GMing, because this is something that I'm struggling with a lot in terms of finding that balance of, as a GM, the sandbox versus the storytelling spectrum, right? Like, so how much do you just lay out a bunch of stuff and you let them pick whatever direction they want to go in? And how much do you have a story that, you're letting them work their way down, but there's still a story path that's, you have crafted to whatever extent you have ahead of time. Like we just, this past Sunday, we recorded our first mission for season 2. And it was very much that, like, I had this, fancy, what I thought was a great, like, Star Trek dilemma climax, ethical dilemma sort of thing, that, like, they ended up in, and actually, like, I think fairly naturally. But there was still this, I think, frustration on their part that they couldn't find their way out. Like, essentially, I created a Kobayashi Maru, and then I didn't let them Kirk their way out of it because I wanted them to deal with the actual Kobayashi Maru of it.
Gotcha.
And so I think they're like, definitely that balance, both I'm still working out and they're still working out in terms of what they like in that regard. So both as a player and now as a player transitioning to a GM, where do you find yourself like on that spectrum, or where do you feel yourself moving towards or away from?
Well, I mean, oh man, I'm trying to think. I think back when we were doing Overlight, I had one of those GM moments where the players just do something totally different than what I was seeing. So it was an episode where it was like maybe the next to last episode of the whole campaign, knowing that we had to wrap up the storyline. And I had them on one part of the continent they were on. And they knew that the big bad, the final battle, was on the other side of the continent. So I was like, okay, you're gonna have to journey and it's gonna take weeks and weeks. But knowing that we would skip ahead, but I would maybe do some like weather hazard rolls and things like that. And then they were like, what if we combine our powers and make a travel bubble? And then the travel bubble it'll transport us across the continent. I was like, yeah, that's what you're doing. I was like, how can I say no to that? That is brilliant and so innovative and creative. And so, yeah, it just kind of skipped us ahead when I had like another half an hour to quarter of an hour of checks that I wanted them to do. But it was so, I guess what I'm saying is like, I know as someone who has mostly I've done more RPG playing than GMing, even though I've done a good amount of both. I think I still think like a player a lot of the times when I'm GMing. But that said, I always I like being surprised by my players, and I'm happy to pivot. Like if they bring something like that to me, I'm like, yep, that's what we're doing. That's it. That's the cool new thing. But going back to like the beginning of your question, for Blood of the Void specifically, I do plan to like have a healthy mix of open sandbox and like mission-based things. So for instance, within the first 3 sessions of 2021, because we play monthly, so 3 sessions is 3 months. But within those first 3 sessions, I have the players, they're heading back to Konosh right now. And once they arrive there, I'm spending like 2 months preparing to just like open sandbox Konosh for them, so that they can go anywhere they want. And I'll have something at least a little inkling of what's in that corner of Konosh, and then build from there, build with them and paint that world. But yeah, because like with a monthly show, it's harder because, if you do a whole session where it's mostly relationship and RPG and just like role playing, that might be kind of boring for the audience, and then they have to wait a month for the next one. But I think I'm just gonna, I don't know, like this next session is probably gonna be pretty RP heavy, and it's gonna be all on the ship on the way back to Konosh. And rather than trying to figure out some cool like mystery for them to solve, I think I'm just gonna let it be what it is, because that's what the characters are heading towards, and I think that's what the players are needing. They're needing just a good RP session. So I don't know. This is like a very complex answer to your complex question.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, honestly, it feels like the answer is, whatever your particular group of people on that particular day needs, for a fully rounded experience. And sometimes that's going to be a sandbox, and sometimes that's going to be a real, art role playing, one act play with a beginning, middle, and ends. And maybe that's the true skill of a GM, is like being able to sit down at the table on whatever day it is and just have a sense of what that particular table on that particular day needs, and what what your players need.
Well, I was gonna say, like, the thing is, like, based on our last session that we did, they just organically were saying character things that I was like, oh, we need to explore what you just said. If I skip ahead and give you some other like mission-based thing, I don't want to lose those like little character nuggets they like brought up organically last session. So that's why I'm like, okay, I was going to have them get to Konosh next session, but nah, we can put that off. They're going to be on the ship for 6 months. So let's just make this next session the 6 months, or however long. But yeah.
Yeah, I find something that I'm definitely having to work on is getting out of my own way in terms of how clever I am as a person or a storyteller. And, like, oh, I have this great idea and I mull on this great idea for 3, 6, 9 months or whatever it is. And then we finally sit down and play. And it doesn't matter how clever I think I am or how long I've spent being clever about whatever this thing is. Once the game starts, it's you got to take yourself out of it and set your own, and this is very difficult for me, but set your own ego aside in terms of how clever you are and how clever the story that you want to tell is, and then let your players you really have to let your players have the reins in a real sense. That, like, if you're a control freak, can be hard, I guess. And I think that's a big part of what I'm kind of still working on.
Mm-hmm. I
um,
think, yeah, I one thing that helps me let go in that way is, so leading up to the session, you do your planning and write notes and things like that. And I kind of just imagine it as if I'm setting up this like diorama or a set even for
hmm.
like, so I'm like, well, this is what's in this corner. And then if they go through that door, this might happen and that triggers that. You know, I'm just setting up the conditions that they're going to visit. Um, and it helps me to let go because I'm like, well, I've literally set up these pins and they might knock over this one or this one or this one, but I don't know which one they're going to set over. I don't know which doorway they're going to go through. All I can do is just set up the conditions and who else is there and what might happen if they do this. And so like my part is just creating the setting for them to come and play in and tell the story.
So when you're approaching like a Star Trek story, maybe it's different because it's a Klingon centered story now, but like you're you're not necessarily setting it up in kind of the way some Star Trek episodes are set up in terms of like this is the Kobayashi Maru test, right? Do you save the freighter or do you not save the freighter? And really, it's an impossible decision where neither answer is right and neither answer is wrong, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
which wrong answer do you want to pick, essentially, or which right answer do you want to pick?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really like setting it up in that way in terms of like trying to mirror the most difficult of Star Trek premises, where it's like this impossible decision that your characters have to make. Is that fair to say, or is that part of what you're looking to do, or whatnot?
I think
I guess.
no, yeah, I think that is like one way to do, you know, a certain type of session for sure, to set up a certain type of session, have that um have it be like a morality thing or an ethical dilemma. And it's very, very Star Trek to do that, as you said. But I think it's just like the approach to it. So like because you can do that just as I know I can do that just as effectively by being like, okay, this is the setting they're going to, this NPC, I'm like, I know what's in this NPC's head, where they've been, where they're going, what they want, what they need to tell these people at this time. And so it's like, I guess yes, I think you can tell stories like that and have those type of settings. But my approach is more so, it's not about like the content per se. I'm not saying like, don't do this type of content or not. What I'm saying is like the way that I set it up is like, as like how is that story going to be told through this setting and through these NPCs that I'm giving these characters? So like if it's the admiral, or I guess like the lieutenant at Starfleet Academy who's like, this is the test, here's how you do the test, then I know what's in this lieutenant's head when they're telling them that, and what, you know, how they're going to respond to a positive comment or a negative comment or a dismissive comment. I don't know if I'm describing it well. It's just like a different, instead of like writing out a narrative story, or in addition to like, once you have an idea of like, I want this to happen, like 3-act structure of a session, right? Of a story that's going to happen. You kind of have to break it down into its components, because like you said, like we've been saying, the best laid plans as a GM will get destroyed by your players. So I think it's better, instead of saying this is what the session story is going to be, just to break down those story elements and set those up so that if they go this direction, that's kind of what the story is going to be, but they're going to flavor it, they're going to change it with their actions.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a very complex juggling act that takes a lot of practice to get right. And I certainly am a long ways off from getting it anywhere close to right. But this has been an awesome discussion. We will now come to the absolutely most critical, important question of this entire interview. What is your favorite episode?
I hate this question.
Give me
all of them.
give me like the half dozen off the top of your head that like, oh, I love this one, or I could watch this one 50 times, or I have watched this 100 times. Like anything.
Okay, I can do that. I can do that. So most recently, I've been watching Voyager and DS9 kind of like simultaneously. So the Voyager episode Macrocosm, where a virus turns big. I love it. It's so silly and just scientifically dumb, but I love it and it's amazing. It's also brilliant. Um, so I love that episode. I love I also, okay, let me just talk about Voyager for a second. Um I I just like, I know Chakotay is really problematic. As a character,
Yeah.
like just everything about Chakotay is very
Yeah.
problematic. But I actually appreciate the episodes that delve into his culture. And if only they had been done, you know, if they had an actual, you know, native and indigenous, multiple native and indigenous people writing those storylines, just, oh, they would have been so amazing. But
As
I
opposed to
do,
what they had, I don't know if you know this piece of
I
trivia, but
do,
what they had
yeah,
in real life, which was somebody who
the
claimed to
fake
be a
native.
native
Yeah.
expert who was literally a fraud in that respect.
Yep.
I also feel
I'm
like
familiar,
I also
sadly.
feel like they made a mistake in trying to make him a generic Native American, and they should have just picked an actual real one tribe or one nation and said, okay,
That
Chakotay is
continues
a
into the future. Yeah.
yeah, he is a Navajo or a Mohawk or Chinook or whatever it is, but like by trying to make a sort of an Acme version of Native American, like that's kind of the source of the problematic nature of it.
Yeah. Yep.
But anyway, yes, that's a good one. I did recently did a rewatch of Voyager in the last year or two, and an episode that really caught me off guard was with how great it was that I didn't remember was it's towards the end where B'Elanna is pregnant and she realizes, it occurs to her that her daughter, her unborn child, is going to have Klingon elements in her biology, in her genes, and so like she's still wrestling with the Klingon elements of her identity, and so she like goes on this crazy journey to like try to pull those out of her unborn child before she's born. Oof. And it's just such a great performance on Roxanne Dawson's parts that like I feel like gets no like in the pantheon of what everybody talks about as great Star Trek episodes, like that one never gets mentioned, and it really should. Like it gets. I don't know if you've seen that one recently, but
no, I haven't seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that because I haven't finished Voyager or DS9.
Okay.
I know, I know certain
end,
things
so.
that happen and stuff. Yeah. No, I haven't seen that, but I agree that Roxanne Dawson, I think she's actually a really lovely actress in Voyager. Like I
agree.
I think B'Elanna is one of the most grounded and well acted roles on that show, and she doesn't get enough credit for that.
I agree completely, and she's also on like something my friend Ryan and I will talk about a lot. Like Ryan's one of his favorite characters is McCoy because partly he feels that like DeForest Kelley just nailed it from square one, right? Where Leonard Nimoy takes a little bit to figure it out, and Shatner takes a little bit to figure out exactly what it is. Like DeKelley is it and dialed in from the word go. And I feel like Roxanne Dawson and B'Elanna is very much the same thing in that regard. Like, okay, obviously Janeway takes a while to figure out, and they never really figure out much of the others. But, Kim, again, these sort of don't ever actually really figure out what to do with him. But, like, Torres B'Elanna is a interesting character who's, like you said, grounded, but then also Roxanne Dawson just nails it from square one in terms of like who that person is and why she feels the way she does about the world that she lives in.
Do you remember the episode where she is depressed and she like, so the episode starts with her doing this like I think it's some like a routine training thing, but she turns off, it's on the holodeck, she turns off the safety protocols, and it's like she's in a plane and the plane is gonna, basically she starts doing all these like very risky daredevil-y things on the holodeck because she has no feeling, and it's a really amazing episode about depression, and that's one of my favorite Voyager episodes too. It's like I just thought that was beautiful. I thought it was really well done.
It's one that actually ties DS9 and Voyager together because the reason she's depressed is because all the Maquis got wiped out by the Dominion in Deep Space Nine. So I always love when a franchise is able to do things like that well, which Star Trek does. Sometimes they do it well, and sometimes they don't do it so well. What DS9 have you watched recently, and that's like really stuck out at you?
Let's see. So in terms of DS9, just things I love about DS9 generally, not just episodes. I feel like the way that I look at, you know, the Next Generation and the Enterprise as home, like it's a special home in my brain. The promenade feels like home. Like whenever there's an episode that's heavily on the promenade, it feels like I've been there. It's like a school I went to. Like it just feels so familiar and homey. Even just like the muted colors and the weird lighting. It's just like I love seeing the promenade. I love seeing like Jake and Nog running around on it feels literally it feels so familiar and homey to me. Um and then, so in terms of episodes of DS9, let's see. Oh, I really liked, um, I liked the Pa Wraith stuff on
Really?
DS9. Yeah,
Okay, that's an
yeah.
unusual answer.
I know it's weird. In general, I'm really fascinated by the way they deal with religion and faith and the Bajorans. And then when the Pa Wraith stuff happens, and there's this one, I think it's like a season ender, maybe like season 5 or 4 or something. I don't remember. um, there's a season ender episode where the Pa Wraiths come and like inhabit, I think it was Guldukat and Kira, and they battle on the station. I just love it. And they just throw down and they destroy all this stuff. It's very scary and cool. It felt like space wizards battling. I just like that. I love their weird. I love how weird it is that they have space aliens that they worship. The Bajorans basically are worshiping aliens, and I think that's awesome and cool.
I did always like. I do like that. I'm not a religious person myself, and a lot of that comes from the humanism of Star Trek and kind of growing up on that, and
Mm.
having that influence. But I do like the idea. Like I always loved Kira and the conflict with her own spirituality of like her boss is also her Jesus, sort of like, and
Yeah, yeah.
how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis? And
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're Kira and you have such strong feelings about things, and when you disagree with your superior officer about something, her character is just kind of like go off and fucking do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
But like when you don't care what your superior officer says when you think something is right, but then your superior officer is also sort of an occupier, which you just kicked
Uh-huh.
the other occupiers out of your home,
Yeah.
but then he's also your space Jesus, sort of. And like how you balance all of those things together, I think, much like Roxanne Dawson and Torres, I think Kira and Nana Visitor don't get the credit they deserve for
Mm-hmm.
like the complexity and the shades of what they're actually like portraying, and doing so, you know, not casually, but like making it look very easy in terms of
Yeah.
these very complex characters in this kind of ridiculous, um, in what can be a ridiculous setting that Star Trek is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what is? Let me ask you this. Maybe this will be an easier question. What is, in your opinion, the worst or most ridiculous episode of Star Trek?
Okay. Oh man, I always forget the name of it. Oh, I think it's called Code of Honor. There it is. It came
Oh
back.
yeah, okay, yeah,
That one is atrocious.
yeah.
That's the one for people who might not remember who are listening. It's the one where in TNG, early TNG,
It's like the second
where
or
they
third episode. I think it's the third
yeah,
episode.
it's super early. They visit space Africans
Yeah,
and it's terrible.
yeah,
It's a bad episode, but it's also like very racist and weird and bad.
yeah.
Um
It's definitely an example of Star Trek. Well, I was gonna say taking a swing at that bat, but no, it's not. That's not even like. That's not even them swinging at the topic and missing. They just sort of
mhm.
like hit themselves in the head with the
Yeah.
worst part of that
Yeah,
um,
and here's the thing.
area.
It's because I want to talk about why it's bad for just a second so that people don't just think, you know what I mean? Because like if you're like, oh, it's bad, they showed space Africans, like, well, don't show space Africans. Got it. It's like, no, that's not
Right.
the right message. That's not the
Yeah.
right lesson to learn from this discussion. The reason why that episode is bad, a few of the many reasons, is that so number one, yes, it's very like reductive. The way they show this society of Black people in space, it's very tribalistic, but not in like a well-informed way. It's very reductive of what actual cultures might have as their like cultural values and things like that. um it's their aggression is simplistic and it's not rooted in like actual reasons why they are the way they are. And then one of the most egregious things is that Tasha Yar is kidnapped and God, I'm rolling my eyes as I say this because Tasha Yar, this beautiful white lady, skinny white lady,
blonde hair, blue eyes,
is kidnapped by the head space nigger in charge, and he wants to keep her and marry her. It's just like, oh God, it's so horrible. So yeah, just further. Just basically what they're saying by having that situation is like, oh, even with these Black people in space who have their own culture and planet, white womanhood is the goal for them too. Like that's what they want too. See, white womanhood is universally, galactically adored and appreciated. So they kidnap our white woman.
Oh, but it's okay because in their society, the women are actually the property holders. So it's okay. It's progressive.
Yes. Oh, but it's okay. And then of course, like the wife or I forget, she's like the previous wife or current wife of the guy who kidnapped Tasha Yar. Yeah. She's all jealous. And it's just like, she has the land. Why does she care? Like she's the one, like literally she could just find herself another dude or be single. Why would she care about, why would she give a fuck about Tasha Yar? Yeah. It's just, oh God, it's just a mess.
That's I remember Will Wheaton a long time ago was like writing, he was rewatching and he was essentially writing recaps, but then also his personal recollections from whatever the episode was, and his recollections from that episode, and specifically about the director of that episode, were not very kind.
Yeah, I know Frakes has come out and said that he was not a fan of that episode. A lot of them.
All right, and we'll wrap everything up on this note. What is the episode of Star Trek that is completely ridiculous, but that you love anyway? That like, oh, it's a stupid episode of Star Trek, but goddamn, I just love it so much.
I mean, I love any episode of 90s and 2000s TV that's named Tabula Rasa. And I don't, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Everyone forgets who they are and they all start dating each other and they're like, oh, I guess you're my husband because we're both wearing blue. Like, it's just so great and dumb.
Or Worf's like, I think I'm in command because I have the sash.
The sash, yeah. I don't know if their TNG episode was called Tabula Rasa.
Maybe no, that was Conundrum.
Thank you. Case. Yes, but it's the exact same idea. Buffy had that episode. Like every 90s and 2000s TV show had that episode.
Yeah.
And I love them.
I specifically remember watching that episode like as a kid, at the time, and like before I had any kind of sophistication about watching or storytelling of any kind, and being like generally like, I wonder who the mole is. Oh, well, maybe it's the actor who's not there every other week of the show. Probably 8-year-old Brian. That probably makes sense, right?
I get it. Yeah. I get that too. Like when I rewatch some of these shows, I did a Buffy rewatch this fall for my one shot, and now I'm doing an Angel rewatch. And yes, there are a lot of episodes. I've rewatched both those shows so many times throughout my life, but then I remember the first time I watched it, the things I thought and the ideas and the questions. And I'm like, how was it not obvious to me? Come on. Clearly Spike is going to do this and this. Like, it's so obvious.
But stuff doesn't become obvious unless you watch it the first time, right?
That's true.
How things become obvious. Well, thank you so much, Aliza, for joining me and for killing so much time on a Wednesday and talking Star Trek and Yuri's Night and RPGs and big, heady social issues, and of course, that most important touchstone of popular culture, the further adventures of Cupid and Eros.
Yes. That hit web series from 2010.
That hit web series that has defined popular culture ever since. Have you ever actually watched? I know I have the DVD around here somewhere. They sent it to me at some point, and I've never watched it. But it's here somewhere in my apartment. I know it's here. Anyway,
I've definitely watched it. Watched it. It was on Hulu. It
saw,
got
yeah,
onto
I
Hulu
read
at
that
one point.
this, you know, in the run up to this and prepping for this, I read somewhere
Oh
that
yeah.
it was on Hulu. So maybe I'll look for it today.
So it
Try
was
it.
a cultural touchstone. We're not just kidding.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Aliza, for joining
All
us.
right.
And yeah, well, until next time, we'll see you out there.
All right, thanks.